The day we buried my husband. My house smelled like lilies and coffee. People floated from room to room, telling me how strong I was. My phone buzzed in my pocket. "Mrs. Turner, it's Charlie Whitmore, Bill's boss, the wealthy one." I stepped into the hallway, away from the noise. I found something. He said, "You need to come to my office. Today. It's Bill's funeral." And don't tell your son or your daughter-in-law." He cut in. His voice dropped. "You could be in danger. Danger. Me." Through the doorway, I saw Nate and Jess laughing, already gesturing around their house. I picked up my car keys with a shaking hand and walked out. An hour before Charlie called, the house was full of voices and paper plates. I was in the kitchen refilling coffee when I heard Jess in the living room, her voice bright and careless. "Once probate is done, we really should list this place," she said. "It's way too big for one person." "For Mom, you mean?" Nate added. "It's basically ours now. Dad always said the house would come to me," someone from Bill's side of the family asked. "Did he leave a will?" Nate answered without missing a beat. "Yeah, the old one. Everything comes to me eventually. Mom knows that." Heat crawled up my neck. I stepped to the doorway just in time to hear Jess say, "You'll be more comfortable in a condo or an assisted living place. Maggie, we can use the equity to pay off our cards and start a college fund for Emma. It just makes sense. I don't know that your father and I decided any of that. I managed." Nate crossed the room and took the empty mug from my hand like I was in the way. "Mom, don't make this complicated," he muttered. "Dad wanted us to have a fresh start. You'll be fine." A couple of cousins looked down at their shoes. In the house I'd scrubbed and paid for my entire adult life, I suddenly felt like a guest overstaying her welcome. Charlie's office building felt like another planet. Glass and steel, a lobby with polished floors, and a receptionist in a blazer that probably cost more than my entire outfit. I signed in with a hand that still smelled faintly of funeral flowers. The elevator rose so smoothly it barely felt like we were moving. My reflection in the mirrored wall looked like I'd wandered into the wrong life by mistake. Black dress, red eyes, little thrift store purse. When the doors slid open, a woman was waiting, mid-30s, sharp suit, dark hair pulled back. "Mrs. Turner?" she asked. "I'm Allison Park. Mr. Whitmore asked me to meet you." She led me down a quiet hallway into a small conference room. On the table sat a thick envelope with my name on it in my husband's handwriting. "For Margaret. If I'm gone." Charlie stepped in, his face more serious than I'd ever seen it at company barbecues. "Your husband didn't just leave memories. Maggie," he said. He left instructions. Before I touched the envelope, I had to steady my hands on the edge of the table and remind myself who I was. My name is Margaret Turner, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 68 years old. I've spent most of my life making less than the men I worked next to and stretching every paycheck. Secretarial jobs, part-time bookkeeping, whatever kept the lights on and the mortgage paid. Bill and I bought our house the year Nate turned 5. It was a small place with a yard just big enough for a swing set. Bill worked overtime at the plant. I clipped coupons until the ink rubbed off on my fingers. We didn't take vacations. We took extra shifts. That house was where everything happened. First days of school, chicken pox, slammed doors, birthday parties. I knew every creak in the floorboards. We paid it off, one slow, stubborn payment at a time. Nate grew up hearing me say, "One day, this will all be yours," when I was tired and wanted him to pick up his toys. Back then it felt like motivation. Now I hear it for what it was, a promise I had no business making. When he was young and stupid with credit cards, Bill and I bailed him out. When he wanted a better car, we co-signed. When he and Jess bought their first condo, we helped with the down payment, which really meant we delayed fixing the roof another year. I thought I was being a good mother. What I was really doing was teaching my son that my work, my savings, my home were all just advance payments on his future. The envelope on the table wasn't the first one with my name on it that year. A few months before Bill died, an ivory envelope had arrived at the house from a law firm downtown. I remember turning it over in my hands at the kitchen table. The return address neat and intimidating. Last will and testament, it said through the little plastic window. Bill had come in from the garage just as I was sliding a finger under the flap. "You don't need to read all that," he said quickly. Dropping his keys in the bowl, I went over everything with them. Shouldn't I at least know what it says I asked? He kissed the top of my head, like that could fix the knot in my stomach. It just puts on paper what we've always said. You'll be taken care of. Nate will have the house. Nothing surprising. I let it go. I always did. Around that same time, he'd started having meetings that ran late. Once. He came home from one with Charlie and a young woman he described as the sharpest estate attorney I've ever met. "Just paperwork," he said, untying his tie. "I want to make sure you're okay, no matter what happens." I remember teasing, planning on something happening. He gave a small, tired smile. Something always does. One night, when his cough was getting worse, I woke to hear his voice low in the hallway, talking on the phone. "Charlie, if I don't make it," he said, "promise me you'll tell Maggie the truth. And help her if Nate tries to push too hard." I lay there in the dark, telling myself I'd misheard. That push too hard meant helping with boxes, not with legal documents and signatures. Now, sitting across from Charlie and Allison, staring at another envelope with my name on it, I understood Bill had been summoning me to this moment for months. I'd just been too scared or too trusting to answer. Charlie pulled out a chair for me and sat across the table, shoulders heavy. "I'm sorry we're doing this today," he said, "but I didn't want you going home from that funeral without knowing what Bill put in your name." I stared at the envelope. My name in his handwriting, the same loops I'd seen on grocery lists for 40 years. "Go ahead," Allison said gently. "Open it." The paper rasped when I tore the flap. On top was a single-page letter, dated 3 months earlier. "Maggie, if you're reading this, I didn't get the time I thought I had. There are a few things I need you to know." My eyes blurred. I swallowed and kept going. "I know you trust our son. I do too, in many ways. But I've watched him talk about the house like it's already his. I've heard him say finally getting the equity in a tone that made my stomach turn. I don't want you depending on promises that disappear the minute you sign something you don't understand. If Nate ever treats our home like a lottery ticket and you like a nuisance in the way, I want it legally clear the house belongs to you. He has no authority to sell the roof over your head. I've updated my will to make sure of that. Charlie and an attorney named Allison helped me do it right. If I'm wrong about him, this won't hurt. If I'm right, this is my way of standing between you and his mistakes one last time, so love, Bill." By the time I reached his name, my hand was shaking. Bill had sat in this building with these people, planning for the day our son might push me aside. Charlie cleared his throat. "There's more," he said. Underneath, 2 stapled sets of documents lay beneath the letter. Allison turned one around so it faced me. "This," she said, tapping the first page, "is the will you saw years ago, the one that left the house and most of the estate to Nate, with the understanding he'd see to your comfort." I could still hear Bill's old reassurance. "It all goes to him, and he'll make sure you're okay in this." Allison continued, placing her hand on the second set. "Is the updated, will your husband signed with me and Mr. Whitmore as witnesses? It revokes the old one." The legal language blurred together. Allison slid a summary sheet toward me, in plain English. She said, "This version puts the house and the main accounts in your name only. Nate is a beneficiary of a separate trust with specific conditions. He gets something, but he does not own your home. He cannot sell it, borrow against it, or use it as collateral without your informed consent, and you are under no obligation to give that consent." I stared at the words. "He did this because he didn't trust him." I said, "He did it because he wanted to protect you." Allison replied, "Those things overlap, but they're not the same." Charlie leaned forward. "Bill came to me after one of your family talks," he said. "He told me Nate spent more time talking about the value of the house than about his health. He wasn't angry. He was worried. He said, 'My son loves the idea of what I can give him more than he loves the idea of me being okay.'" Allison went on, What concerns me now is what you described on the phone. She said, your son talking about listing the house, bringing in a realtor, assuming the old will controls everything. That, combined with pressure on you to move, can cross into what the law calls undue influence. In older clients, it's often the start of elder financial abuse. Elder abuse, I repeated. From my own child, it doesn't always start with shouting, she said. Sometimes it starts with a pen and a stack of papers someone calls just routine. My mind flicked back to the folder Nate had casually placed on the coffee table last week. What if I had signed something already, I whispered. Then we'd work to unwind it, Allison said. But the good news is, you haven't. And now you know exactly what Bill intended. In writing, with witnesses who are willing to back you up if it ever comes to that. Charlie nodded. I promised him I'd be here for you, he said. Not to run your life, just to make sure no one steamrolls you while you're grieving. I had spent days feeling guilty for hesitating when Nate talked about selling the house. What if I'm overreacting? I asked. What if Nate is just clumsy with his words? What if he really would take care of me? Allison's gaze was steady. Then setting clear legal boundaries won't hurt him. She said, decent people adjust to boundaries. People who are counting on your confusion are usually the only ones who get upset. I thought of Nate's hand tightening on my elbow, his voice in my ear, Mom. Don't make this complicated. Complicated, I realized. Was his word for anything that didn't end with me signing? Allison folded her hands. Here's what I recommend, she said. We file this updated will with the court. We send notice to your son, his wife, and any realtor or lender involved that you are represented by counsel, and that no transaction involving the house is to proceed without your direct consent and my review. In the meantime, you do not sign anything related to your home or Bill's accounts without calling me first. Her tone was calm, but the message was sharp. And if he gets angry, I asked, Anger is not an emergency, she said. Losing your house is... Bill had not left me adrift. He had drawn a boundary and handed it to two people who knew how to enforce it. I was the one who had to decide whether to stand behind it. Allison's voice softened. Do you want to keep believing your son would never hurt you? She asked. Or do you want to act on the proof that he already is? The question sat between us like a third document on the table, one only I could sign. I looked down at Bill's letter again, at the uneven line of his signature. I want to act, I said. I'm tired of being the only one in this family who doesn't get to make decisions. Allison nodded once. Then we'll start today, she said. We didn't waste time. Allison flipped to a clean legal pad and wrote my name at the top, then drew 3 columns underneath. Okay, she said. Let's talk about what happens next. We're going to build a fence around you and your home. Not to trap you, but to keep other people from walking in and rearranging your life. She labeled the columns Allison, Charlie, Maggie, under her own name. She wrote in neat block letters, file will, probate, notices. First, she said, I'll file this updated will with the probate court. That puts the law on record with what Bill actually intended. Until that's done, everything is muddy. Nate will be operating on old information. Maybe on purpose. Maybe not. Once the court has this, the old will is officially revoked. She glanced up to make sure I was following. I nodded. Second, she went on, I'll draft letters to your son, to his wife, and to anyone already circling the property realtors, loan officers, whoever to let them know you are represented by counsel. No more side conversations where they corner you at the kitchen table. The idea of someone else's name standing between me and a stack of papers felt like stepping off a cliff onto something solid. Can you give me the names of anyone Nate has mentioned? She asked. The realtor's first name is Kyle. I said, I don't know the last. And there was a woman from a bank who called and asked for me, then said Nate had given her my number. Allison wrote Kyle, realtor and bank contact with blank lines beside them. We'll track them down. She said, Charlie's team can help if we need to do a little digging. She moved to the second column and wrote Charlie at the top. For you, she said to him, we'll need copies of any beneficiary forms or insurance documents Bill updated through the company. The more paperwork we can show that matches this will, the harder it is for anyone to claim it's some last-minute trick. Done, he said. I'll have HR pull everything and send it over, and if you need me to testify about what he told me, you know I will. Allison nodded, then turned back to me. And this, she said, tapping the empty third column, is the most important one. Maggie's list. My stomach fluttered. What goes on my list? I asked. Your side of the fence, she said. Starting with this, you do not sign anything related to your home, Bill's accounts, or any loan documents, no matter how harmless they sound, without calling me first. Not a refinance, not a power of attorney, not a temporary authorization. Nothing. I thought of the pile of forms Nate had left on the coffee table a week before, with sticky notes that said, "Sign here," Mom in his handwriting. What if he says it's just a formality, I asked. That phrase is a red flag. Allison said, this will make things easier. If it's such a formality, it can wait until your attorney has read it, she wrote as she spoke. The list under my name taking shape. No signatures without review. Document pressure in conversations. Secure personal papers. For the next few weeks, she said, I want you to write things down. Dates, times, what was said. If Nate or Jess bring up the house, the will, moving you out, anything like that, don't argue in the moment. Just make a note when they leave. It doesn't have to be perfect. We just need a record that shows this isn't coming out of nowhere. You think it'll get that bad, I asked. I think it already is. She replied, You told me they were talking about our house at your husband's funeral. That's not grief talking. That's entitlement. The word landed with more force than I expected. Entitlement. I'd always thought of Nate as overwhelmed, stressed, unlucky. I hadn't let myself think of him as believing he was owed my entire life's work. Allison continued, Also, I want you to gather any financial documents you have at home deed, mortgage payoff, bank statements, anything Bill kept locked away. Put them in one place you can control. I don't have a safe. I said, Just a metal box in the closet. She considered, That's a start. If you're comfortable, we can keep copies here. She offered, or at least scan them. The less opportunity anyone has to lose something inconvenient, the better. Charlie spoke up. I can send someone over under the guise of dropping off a plant from the office, he said. They can help you gather things if that feels safer than doing it alone while your son's around. I almost laughed at the absurdity of needing an escort to go through my own file cabinet. Then I pictured Nate standing over me, saying, Don't worry about that, Mom. We'll handle it. And the humor dried up. We'll see, I said. Let me try first. Allison added one more line under my name, No private meetings at home. She underlined it. This part is crucial. She said, No more come over. Mom, we'll talk about it when it's just us. And if Nate wants to discuss anything related to the house or money, you tell him he can do it here, with me present, or not at all. The thought of saying that to my own child made my throat tighten. For years, I'd thought being a good mother meant being available behind closed doors, fixing problems quietly so no one got embarrassed. Your son is counting on you not understanding this paperwork, Allison said softly. Our job is to make sure you understand it better than he does. I looked at the 3 columns. For so long, the plan had always been some version of Maggie's sacrifices. Nobody talks about it. This was different. This was me on the page, not as an afterthought, but as someone with assignments that protected me instead of draining me. What about the confrontation, I asked before I could stop myself? Because there will be one. He's not going to like getting a letter from a lawyer. Allison nodded. There will be. She agreed. We don't go looking for it. We let it come to us. On ground we've prepared. At some point, Nate will try to move forward with his version of events. He'll bring a realtor, or a lender, or both, into your living room, expecting to get your signature like it's a rubber stamp. My chest tightened. I could see it already, Kyle's business card on the coffee table, Jess's practiced smile, Nate's hand heavy on my shoulder. "That's when we show up," she said, "with the updated will, with Bill's letter, with the law on your side. Not to humiliate him, though it may feel that way to him, to put a stop to this before a single line is crossed that we can't uncross." "And if he keeps pushing," I asked, "then we have options." Allison said, "We can involve Adult Protective Services if necessary. We can petition the court for an order protecting your right to stay in your home, but we're not starting there. We're starting with information and boundaries." She paused, then added, "You're allowed to protect yourself from your own child, morally, legally, emotionally. That doesn't make you a bad mother, it makes you a person." For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the soft tick of the conference room clock. I realized my life had been divided into two eras before Bill got sick, and after. It occurred to me that maybe there was a third line now before I ever sat at a table like this, and after, for once. I said slowly, "I'm not asking. What will keep my son happy?" Allison watched me, waiting. "I'm asking, what will keep me safe?" I finished. "That's the right question." She said, "Back home." The house felt different. The lilies in the vases were beginning to brown at the edges. Sympathy cards still lined the mantel, their cursive words blurring together. I set my purse down and didn't go to the sink or the laundry basket. I went straight to the hall closet, on the top shelf, behind an old winter coat, sat the metal box where I'd stuffed important papers for years, birth certificates, the deed, car titles, tax returns. I hauled it down and carried it to the kitchen table like it was something fragile and alive. The lock clicked open with the same tiny key I'd used 100 times. But this was the first time I opened it for myself instead of to fetch something for Bill. I sorted slowly, making piles the way Allison had shown me in the office house. Bank, insurance, other, for each document. I wrote the date on a sticky note and what it meant in plain words. Deed. House is ours. Paid off. Reefy papers from 2009. Lower interest. Both names. Life insurance. Me listed as beneficiary. When I hit a file marked Nate, loans. I hesitated. Copies of old promissory notes, credit card payoff letters, an email printout where I told a collections agent I'd be sending a cashier's check. I added another sticky note, money we already gave him. By the time the sun slipped lower, there was a small universe of my life spread across the kitchen table. My phone pinged. A text from Nate. "Jess wants to come by tomorrow afternoon to talk about next steps. We'll bring Kyle so he can explain things." That okay a week ago? I would have replied, "Of course, I'll make coffee." I would have apologized for being so slow to cooperate, promised to have my papers ready. Now I looked at Allison's list on my counter. No private meetings at home, no signatures, no more just us. I typed slowly. "I've hired an attorney to help me understand things. Any conversations about the house need to be with her present at her office. I'll send you her info." Dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared. An attorney mom. "Why, this is just family stuff. You're making this bigger than it needs to be." I heard his voice in the text, that mix of impatience and charm that had gotten him out of tickets and into my checkbook more times than I could count. I didn't explain. I sent Allison's business card photo and a final line. "I'm not signing anything without her." There was a long pause. Finally, "Fine. We'll talk." I set the phone down next to Bill's letter. The fence wasn't finished, but the posts were in the ground. For the first time. The plan for my life didn't depend on other people's good intentions. It depended on my signature or the lack of it. The day we set the fence on fire. The sun was too bright for what was about to happen. I woke up early and cleaned the kitchen. Not because anyone was coming who deserved a clean kitchen, but because my hands needed something to do. I wiped the same spot on the counter 3 times before I realized there was nothing there. By noon, my heart had settled into a slow, pounding rhythm, steady, like the thud of someone knocking from inside a wall. At 1 o'clock, a car door slammed outside, then another. I watched from the front window as Nate climbed out of his SUV, phone in his hand, Shirt untucked like he wanted to look casual. Jess followed. Hair perfectly smooth, a leather folder tucked under her arm, behind them. A sedan pulled up. A man in a blazer and 2 white teeth got out, juggling a briefcase and a stack of glossy brochures. Kyle, I guessed. I stepped back from the window before they could see me. They didn't knock once. They knocked 3 times in quick succession, like they were already impatient. I let them wait through the first set and opened on the second. "Hey, Mom," Nate said, leaning in to kiss my cheek like this was any other visit. His eyes darted past me into the house. "We brought Kyle so he can go over the numbers with you. He's awesome." Jess held out the leather folder. "We've got everything laid out super clearly," she said. "We're not trying to overwhelm you. Promise. This is going to make things simpler for everyone." The word simpler slid over my skin like oil. I forced a small smile and stepped aside. "Come in," I said. "Let's sit in the dining room. There's more space." I led them past the living room, past Bill's empty chair, to the table that had seen every major decision of our lives' mortgages, school forms, birthday cakes, arguments no one apologized for. The afternoon light slanted across the wood, catching the dust motes I hadn't gotten to. Kyle set his stack down like a magician arranging props. "Mrs. Turner, thank you so much for having me," he said, all polish. "First of all, let me just say how sorry I am for your loss. Bill was clearly a great guy. Nate's told me so much about him. He had the kind of handshake that squeezed a fraction too hard and held a fraction too long." "Thank you," I said, pulling my hand back. Jess slid into the chair closest to Kyle, leaving the seat at the end of the table for Nate. I sat opposite them, where Bill had always sat when we had family talks. As Kyle opened his folder, I heard the faintest echo of Allison's voice in my mind. "Let it come to you, on ground you've prepared." "So," Kyle said, flipping the first page toward me, "here's the basic plan. Once the estate's probated, the property transfers as per the existing will. We've already got a buyer lined up who's really excited about the neighborhood. You're sitting on a lot of equity here." He smiled like it was a compliment. Nate nodded along. "We ran the numbers," he said, "after commissions and fees. There's more than enough to pay off our student loans and the cards, and we can put a big chunk into an account for Emma's future. You won't have to worry. We'll set you up somewhere nice and manageable. Somewhere nice. Somewhere not here." Jess jumped in. "There's this independent living community we found with a shuttle and everything." She said, "You'd have activities, people your own age. It's honestly an upgrade." "Yeah," Nate said. "No more shoveling snow. No more worrying about the yard. You deserve that." I watched their mouths move around the word "you" and saw what they meant was, "we." Kyle flipped to another page. "All we need from you right now," he said, "is to initial here." He tapped a highlighted box acknowledging that you're aware of the plan to list and that you consent to us beginning preliminary marketing. It doesn't lock you into anything right this second. It just keeps the ball rolling so you don't miss the market window. There it was, just a formality, just to keep things moving. I folded my hands in my lap to keep them from shaking and reminded myself, I'm not alone. "I told you in my text," I said quietly, "that I've hired an attorney." Jess's smile tightened. "Right," she said. "We got the card. That's good. But this is really basic. Maggie, we didn't want to bother some lawyer over stuff that's just—" "Actually," came a voice from the doorway, "this is exactly the kind of stuff you bother a lawyer about." All 4 of us turned. Allison stood there in her navy suit, one hand on the doorframe, a slim briefcase in the other, behind her. Charlie filled the space in his dark coat, his expression unreadable. Nate's face went through 3 expressions in a second: surprise, annoyance, calculation. "Mom," he said slowly, "you invited an audience. I invited my attorney." I said, "You brought yours?" Kyle held up his hands. "Whoa, whoa," he said, laughing nervously. "I'm just a realtor. I'm not anybody's attorney." Allison stepped into the room like she owned it. "Good," she said. "Then you'll appreciate knowing exactly what you're stepping into." She offered Kyle her card. "I'm Allison Park. I represent Mrs. Turner in all matters related to her late husband's estate and this property." Kyle took the card, eyes flicking between her and the paperwork on the table. Charlie moved to stand behind me, a quiet, solid presence at my shoulder. It was the first time I'd ever seen him in my home. It made the walls feel closer together and safer, all at once. Nate cleared his throat. "Look," he said, "I think we're overcomplicating this. Dad had a will. We all know what it says. This is just about carrying out his wishes." Allison set her briefcase down and opened it. "That's exactly what I'm here to ensure," she said. "That Bill Turner's actual, updated wishes are carried out, not just the parts people find convenient." The color rose in Nate's neck. "What is that supposed to mean?" Jess demanded. Allison didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pulled out 2 stapled documents and laid them side by side on the table, facing us. "You've seen this one," she said, tapping the first. "The will Bill wrote years ago, leaving the house and most of the estate to Nate, with the vague understanding that he'd take care of his mother." Her voice didn't add the part the law always adds silently if he feels like it. "And this," she said, resting her hand on the second, "is the will your husband executed later, with proper witnesses and registration. This is the controlling document now, not the old one." Nate leaned forward, squinting. "I've never seen that," he said. "You weren't supposed to." Allison replied, "It wasn't addressed to you." I watched Jess's eyes narrow as she took herself in hand. "With all due respect," she said, "Bill never mentioned changing anything to us, and the will we saw names Nate. So unless that's a forgery," Charlie's voice cut in, low and steady. "I was there," he said, "at the signing. So was our firm's notary. So was another witness. Bill asked me to help him do this by the book. He was very clear about what he wanted. And what was that Nate shot back?" Allison slid a 1-page summary toward him, the same one she'd shown me in the office. "In plain English," she said, "that your mother owns this house outright. She has full authority over whether it is ever sold. You do not." Silence settled over the table like dust. Jess recovered first. "That doesn't make any sense," she said. "Why would he cut Nate out like that? He's our only child. He knows we have Emma. How is that fair? As if the math of my entire life came down to what they considered even." "Nate isn't cut out," Allison corrected. "He's a beneficiary of a separate trust, one that activates under specific conditions. But this house, this roof," she looked at me, then back at them, "this belongs to Maggie. Period." "This is insane," Jess said. He must have been confused. He was sick at... People change things when they're not in their right mind. He was in full possession of his faculties. Charlie said sharply, "We wouldn't have moved forward if he weren't. He came to me because he was worried about this exact situation." Nate's mouth twisted. "Oh, so now you're the father I never had," he snapped. It stung more than I wanted it to. Not because it was true, but because it was the kind of line that sounds better than it feels. He'd learned from somebody that if you wound the people on the other side of the table, they might back down. Charlie didn't flinch. "I'm the man your father trusted to protect your mother when he couldn't," he said. "That's why I'm here." Allison picked up another sheet from her briefcase. "There's one more thing," she said, her tone softening. "Bill anticipated that this would sound harsh to you, so he wrote something we all agreed should be kept with the will. Maggie's already read it. You deserve to hear some of it, too." She glanced at me for permission. I nodded, throat tight. She unfolded the letter Bill had written, the one with my name at the top. The ink slightly smudged where my tears had fallen the first time, in his own words, she said. Her voice filled the room. "I know you trust our son. I do too, in many ways. But I've watched him talk about the house like it's already his. I've heard him say, finally getting the equity, in a tone that made my stomach turn. Nate shifted in his seat. I don't want you depending on promises that disappear the minute you sign something you don't understand. If Nate ever treats our home like a lottery ticket and you like a nuisance in the way, I want it legally clear the house belongs to you. He has no authority to sell the roof over your head. Allison paused, then read the last part quietly. If I'm wrong about him, this won't hurt. If I'm right, this is my way of standing between you and his mistakes one last time. By the time she finished, the only sound was the ticking of the old wall clock and the far-off rush of a car passing outside. Nate's jaw clenched. He actually wrote that he whispered. He did. Charlie said he agonized over it. But he wrote it. Jess barked a short, disbelieving laugh. So what? He talked to you and some lawyer, and that overrides his whole life with us, she said. You swoop in now and tell us we're the bad guys because we're trying to be practical. Allison's eyes sharpened. This isn't about bad guys, she said. It's about the law and about consent. Right now, you are attempting to start a real estate transaction using an outdated will on the assumption that the person who actually owns the property will sign whatever you put in front of her. That is a problem. Kyle cleared his throat, his salesman shine dimming. I wasn't aware there was a newer will, he said. Nate told me that's exactly the issue. Mr. Kyle, Allison said. You've been making representations to potential buyers based on information provided by someone who does not, in fact, have clear title to this house. There are legal terms for that. None of them are good for you. His eyes widened. Let's slow down, he said. If there's a question about the will, we can hit pause. No contract's been signed yet. Jess turned to him, incredulous. You're just going to bail, she demanded. We've done all this work. Talk to buyers. I'm going to not get sued or dragged into an elder abuse complaint. He snapped, then flushed. No offense. Mrs. Turner, I'm just finding out about this. None taken, I said softly. Elder abuse, Nate repeated, his voice half outrage, half fear. No one is abusing anyone. We're trying to help her. She can't handle this house alone. Allison steepled her fingers. Help would be asking what she wants and making sure she understands her options. She said, not deciding what you want, calling it a fresh start, and pushing for signatures while she's still planning your father's funeral. Jess opened her mouth, then shut it again. This is ridiculous, Nate said. Mom knows Dad wanted us to have the house eventually. He always said, I know what your father used to say. I cut in. The words surprised me as much as they seemed to surprise him. My voice was steady, not the thin, apologetic thing it usually became when he was upset. He used to say, one day, this will all be yours. When he wanted you to mow the lawn, I said, he said it when we were tired, when we were trying to get you to imagine a future worth working for. It was lazy parenting on our part. It was not a legal promise. And it was never supposed to mean you could put a for sale sign in my yard before the flowers on his coffin had wilted. The color drained from Nate's face. For a moment, he didn't look like the exasperated adult son who'd been talking at me for months. He looked like the boy who'd once stood in this same room insisting a C+ was basically a B if you looked at it right. Mom, he said softly, that's not fair. You're twisting. I have twisted myself into knots for you. I said, for decades, to make your mistakes look smaller, to make your demands sound reasonable, to excuse the way you talk about this house, about my life, as if it's all a stack of chips you just haven't cashed in yet. My hands trembled in my lap, but I didn't look down this time. I kept my eyes on him. You didn't just talk about it. Nate, I went on. You brought a stranger into my home with papers for me to sign. You told people this was your house while I was still wearing my funeral dress. That's not grief. That's greed. He flinched like I'd struck him. Jess jumped in, her voice sharp. He's under a lot of stress. She said, we are drowning in bills. We thought, I know what you thought, I said. You thought my age and my grief made me easy to move around. You thought you could cash in on a version of Dad's will that no longer exists. Before anyone who knew better stepped in, Jess's mouth shut with an audible click. Charlie shifted his weight behind me. They're not the first couple to make that mistake, he said quietly, but they don't have to keep walking down that road. Allison slid the old will back into her briefcase and left the updated one on the table. "This document is the roadmap now," she said. "Maggie stays in her home unless she chooses not to. She controls what happens to it. Any attempt to pressure her into signing away that right, or to mislead third parties into acting as if this house is already yours, has consequences." Kyle checked his watch, then gathered his glossy brochures in a small, frantic stack. "I'm going to step out," he said. "I'll, send you an email. Mrs. Turner, confirming we're not moving forward with any listing until this is all resolved. If it ever is." "It is resolved," Allison said. "We've just read the resolution aloud." He nodded too many times and backed out of the room like the house was on fire. The absence of his cologne was immediate. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Nate stared at the wood grain of the table. Jess stared at me like I'd become someone she didn't recognize. "Do you even care that we're drowning?" she asked finally, her voice low. "That we have a kid to think about. College, a future. You have a paid-off house and a pension. You have jobs." I said. "You have years ahead of you to earn, to budget, to make different choices. I have a finite amount of time and the home I broke my body to keep. It is not my responsibility to set myself on fire to keep you warm." The words weren't mine. Not exactly. They were a dozen phrases Rachel and Allison and articles I'd read, swirling together into something that finally fit in my mouth. Jess laughed once, bitterly. "So that's it," she said. "You're choosing the house over your own son. I am choosing my right to not be homeless or beholden." I said, "I am choosing the future your husband put on paper for me when he realized that he couldn't trust you to choose it for me." Nate's chair scraped back abruptly. He stood, hands on his hips, eyes wet. "I can't believe he did this." He said, "I can't believe you're doing this. Over a stupid will. It's not about the paper," I said softly. "It's about the truth it forced into the open." He looked at Charlie. "You encouraged him. He accused. You put this in his head." Charlie shook his head. "He came to me," he said, "because he'd already seen enough to know what might happen. You proved him right faster than he wanted. I saw the moment that landed." Nate's shoulders sagged as if someone had cut invisible ropes. He turned back to me. "So what now?" he asked. "You just keep living here forever like none of this conversation mattered?" "No," I said. "I keep living here knowing exactly who I'm living here without—" It hurt to say that. It also felt like telling the truth to myself for the first time. Jess gathered her folder, the movement jerky. "Come on." "Nate," she said, "we're not going to sit here and be called greedy monsters in front of strangers." "No one used the word monster," Allison said mildly. "But if the shoe fits, consider buying a different pair." Jess shot her a look that would have withered a lesser woman. Allison remained non-flammable. Nate hesitated. "Mom," he said, "we'll talk later." "I'm sure we will," I said. "But the answer about the house isn't going to change, and next time you want to explain something, bring it to Allison's office first, not my dining room." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Without another word, he and Jess walked out. The door closed harder than necessary. A picture frame rattled on the wall. For a long moment, I sat very still. My hands were empty. My lap was empty. The chair next to me where Bill used to sit was empty, but for the first time in a long time. I did not feel like the one with nothing. Allison exhaled slowly. "You did well," she said. "I feel like I swallowed glass," I replied. "That's how boundaries taste the first time," she said. "You get used to it." Charlie moved around the table and took the chair Nate had vacated. "You know," he said, "when Bill first came to me, he was terrified of exactly the scene we just saw. His greatest fear was you being pressured with no backup. We didn't stop the pressure, but we did make sure you weren't alone when it arrived." I looked at the updated will on the table, at the black lines of text that had just rewritten the script I'd been reciting in my head for decades. I keep thinking about that letter. I said, "He knew. He knew our son might do this, and he did it anyway. Charlie nodded. Love does strange math, he said. He didn't stop loving Nate, he just stopped pretending Nate was incapable of choosing himself over you. Allison began packing up her papers. From a legal standpoint, she said, we've drawn a very clear line. There will be emails, maybe some angry calls, but the big collision has happened. You are on record in front of witnesses as refusing to sign away your home. That matters. What if they stop talking to me? I asked quietly. What if Emma grows up hearing that her grandmother stole their inheritance? Then someday, Allison said, if she's anything like most kids, she'll come looking for the other side of the story. And you'll have more than your memory to show her. You'll have the paper. You'll have your own words from today. You'll have a life she can see with her own eyes. I swallowed hard. And in the meantime, she added, you'll have a place to sleep that you can lock from the inside. The house hummed around us, old pipes ticking, refrigerator humming, the faint sound of a dog barking 3 houses down. I realized the fear that had been wrapped around this place for months, fear of being pushed out, of losing what I'd built had loosened. Not gone, but loosened. If they come back with flowers and apologies next week, I asked, then you listen, Allison said, and you keep your copy of the will in the other room. Forgiveness, if you choose it, doesn't include signing over your deed. And if they come back with more papers, I asked. She smiled faintly. Then you call me, she said, and we do this again, preferably with fewer brochures. After they left, the house was quiet in a new way. I made myself a cup of tea, the same way I always had. Boil water, steep, a little sugar. I sat at the same table where, an hour earlier, my son had tried to convince me that my life was too big for me. The will lay on the wood between my hands. Bill's letter lay beside it. There was a dent in the table where Nate's fist had once slammed down in a teenage tantrum about curfews. Next to it was a scar from a candle that had burned too low at one of Emma's birthday parties. Our history and scratches and stains. I ran my fingers over both. Then over the edge of the paper that now said, in dry legalese, that I belonged here as much as any memory outside. The sun had begun to lower, throwing long shadows across the yard. The house didn't feel like a prize waiting to be claimed anymore. It felt like what it had always been, before I let other people's expectations rewrite it my home. By the time the maple tree on the corner turned red again, a year had almost passed. Seasons had moved through the house the way they always did, snow piling against the back steps, daffodils pushing up in the spring, cicadas whining in the trees in July. The ache of Bill's absence changed shape but never quite left. Still, the sharp edges of those first months had worn down into something quieter, something I could carry without dropping everything else. One afternoon in early fall, I found myself back in Allison's office, wearing a sweater instead of a funeral dress. This time, she said, sliding a fresh folder toward me. We're not talking about Bill's wishes. We're talking about yours. I sat a little straighter. When I'd first walked into this room, it had felt like the place where other people made decisions for me. Now it felt, cautiously, like a place where I might make some for myself. Allison uncapped her pen. Right now, your planning is basically whatever Bill left behind. She said, it protects you from being pushed out while you're alive. That's good. But the parts about what happens after you're gone, she shook her head. They're still written in a world where the assumption was everything to Nate. He'll do the right thing. Do you still want your documents to say that? The old me would have answered yes automatically, because anything else would have felt like treason. The woman sitting in that chair had sat through a year of lawyer letters, tight-lipped family gatherings, and long walks around the block reminding herself she was allowed to be more than a bridge to someone else's comfort. No, I said. I don't. Allison's smile was small but genuine. Good, she said. Let's write down what you do want. We started with the boring, unglamorous parts, powers of attorney, healthcare directives, the details most people avoid until a crisis forces their hand. She asked who I trusted to make medical decisions if I couldn't. For now. Still Nate. I said, he's trying. And if he has to choose between a surgery and his weekend plans, I'd like a doctor in the room when he hears the options. She chuckled. We can build in that kind of oversight, she said. Then we moved to the will. Think in layers, she said. Layer 1 you, layer 2, people you want to benefit if there's anything left. Layer 3 causes you care about. Layer 1 was simple and hard at the same time. I want to be able to stay in this house as long as my body lets me. I said, and I want enough set aside that if I have to move to assisted living someday, I can do it because it's right for me, not because someone else needs the cash from my walls. She translated that into clauses and percentages. Primary goal, your housing and care, she summarized, writing it in plain English on top of the legal draft. If you need to spend down the inheritance to make sure you're safe and comfortable, that's not failure. That's the plan. Layer 2 took longer. I don't want to cut Nate out completely. I said, he's still my son. And Emma. I don't want her punished for mistakes she didn't make. We can acknowledge that, she said. But we don't have to pretend everyone has behaved the same. In the end, the paper showed what my heart had been stumbling toward all year. If there was anything left after my care, Emma would get a college account in her name, with someone other than her parents as trustee until she was old enough to use it wisely. Nate would receive a portion through a trust that didn't hand him a lump sum, but offered help with specific things therapy, if he wanted it, education if he ever went back to school, a down payment only if he could show a pattern of paying his own bills without me. And if he doesn't like those strings, I asked, then he doesn't have to pull on them. Allison said, you're not obligated to fund behavior you've already learned is harmful to you or to him. Layer 3 surprised me. All this talk about elder abuse, I said. I keep thinking about people who don't have a Charlie or an Allison, people who sign whatever is put in front of them and lose everything quietly. There are organizations that help, she said. Hotlines, legal aid, shelters, even. In the worst cases, I thought of the phrase I'd seen in one of the brochures Charlie had left me, financial exploitation. I'd like some of it to go there, I said. If there is any some of it, maybe they can help some other woman say no sooner than I did. Allison wrote it down without fanfare, turning my vague wish into a specific bequest with a name and tax identification number. When we were done, she pushed the draft toward me. This is you, she said. Not Bill, not Nate, not what anyone else expects. You. The pages were full of phrases I didn't fully understand, but the structure underneath them was clear for the first time. My life on paper matched the way I wanted my last years to look in reality. I signed where she told me, the pen leaving little grooves in the thick paper. Congratulations, she said. You just made sure the next version of What's Fair includes you. On the bus ride home. The folder on my lap felt heavier than its few ounces of paper should have allowed. I held it close, the way I'd once held Nate when he was small and fell asleep in the car. For years, a terrible quiet thought had lurked at the back of my mind that I was just a placeholder, that my real job was to stay alive long enough to hand the house keys to my son and then get out of the way. Now there was a different sentence sitting next to that one. I am not a bridge. I am a destination. With the legal walls in place, everyday life began to feel less like a battlefield and more like a house that needed ordinary tending. I made a list of things we'd put off while Bill was sick, and while I was afraid the house would be ripped away from me any minute. Fix roof leak over back bedroom, replace the mattress that makes my hip ache, get the furnace serviced before it dies in January instead of during. The old me would have looked at that list and thought of how each item reduced the hypothetical future pot of money for the kids. Now, when the repairman handed me an estimate, I saw something else: investments in my own ability to live here without misery when the roofer finished. I stood in the back bedroom during the next rainstorm and listened. No drip, no bucket, just the soft, even patter on shingles and the steady tick of the radiator. I paid for that sound. I thought, for me. I started doing something I hadn't done since I was a young woman with hope and not much else. I made a budget that had my name at the top and no one else's at the bottom. Social Security, a small survivor's benefit from Bill's pension, a part-time job I took at the local library, shelving books and answering questions about copy machines, rent zero. For as long as my legs could climb the stairs, groceries, utilities, prescriptions, a new line, Maggie's life. It wasn't much. $20 here, $30 there. Enough for a coffee with Carol at the bakery once a week instead of once a month. Enough for a water aerobics class at the community center that made my joints hurt less and my world feel a little bigger than the space between my sink and my couch. The first time I signed up for a class, my finger hovered over the confirm button online. This is silly. I thought, you could do exercises in your living room for free. Then I pictured the faces of the women in the brochure laugh lines, swim caps, the kind of awkward joy people get when they do something just for themselves. I clicked confirm. The pool was warmer than I expected, the air humid and smelling faintly of chlorine and sunscreen. On my first day, a woman a little older than me paddled over and introduced herself. "I'm Denise." She said, "First time, yes," I admitted. "I'm not much of a swimmer." "Good news," she said. "You don't have to be. Just keep moving." We talked in snatches between leg lifts and slow laps, the easy, surface conversations of people who know the important things about each other without saying them out loud. We were old enough to remember when everything cost less. We'd both buried someone, and we were both trying very hard not to disappear into our grief. When the class ended, my muscles felt pleasantly tired. My hair smelled like a public pool. My heart felt looser. On the walk home, I stopped at the corner bakery and bought a muffin that cost more than the ones in the grocery store, but tasted like someone had paid attention while they made it. "Is this allowed?" I teased myself. Biting into it, "Yes." A newer, quieter voice answered, "This is what the line on the budget is for." Nate did go to therapy. I know this not because he told me right away, but because one afternoon, he showed up with a folder full of papers and the awkward energy of someone new to saying sentences that start with "my therapist says." We sat at the same kitchen table where we'd fought and cried and read Bill's letter. There were no realtors this time, no legal briefs, just my son and a stack of printouts with colored graphs. "I need your brain," he said, half joking. "Not your checkbook." I raised an eyebrow. "That's a new sentence," I said. He rubbed the back of his neck. "Yeah. Well," he said, "apparently, when you spend your whole life thinking other people will bail you out, you don't exactly build the muscles for reading your own financial statements." He spread the papers out, budget categories, interest rates, a debt payoff plan his therapist had suggested he make with an actual financial counselor instead of just hoping future raises would save him. "I keep looking at this miscellaneous line," he said, tapping a bar that loomed large on the page. "It's like my spending black hole. My counselor says I need to name it if I want to change it." Something in me wanted to laugh, but not unkindly. How many years had I floated money into his miscellaneous without asking any questions, just so I wouldn't have to hear his disappointment if I refused miscellaneous? I said, "Is where your denial lives." He snorted. "You sound like my therapist." He said, "Maybe he's smart," I replied. We spent an hour going through his numbers. I pointed out the games he was still trying to play, pretending a quarterly bill didn't exist until it landed, counting on a tax refund that might not come. More than once. I had to bite back the old reflex I could just write a check and make the red numbers go away. Instead, when he winced at the total on his credit cards, I said, "That's a hard number to sit with." "But you can't change what you won't look at." He nodded slowly. "My counselor says that too." He said, "About other stuff." We both knew what other stuff meant without naming it, at one point. He looked up from the page. "Mom," he said, "do you ever regret helping me before, with the loans and all that?" I thought of the roof that had leaked for an extra year because we'd used the money to pay off his car. The nights I'd lain awake worrying about bills that weren't even mine. I regret that I did it quietly. I said, like it was the only option. I wish I'd attached strings, or at least a conversation. Strings like the trust. He said, yes, I said. Strings like the trust. He nodded. Eyes back, on the paper. I hate that word, he admitted, but I get why it's there now. We paused at the same moment, hearing what he'd just said. He understood, at least a little, that boundaries were not punishment. They were a belated attempt at fairness for me, and if he let them be, for him. Jess came to the house alone one evening in the spring, a Tupperware container in her hands. I made too much lasagna, she said, holding it out. Figured you could use a night off from cooking. The old me would have protested, insisted I was fine, turned it into a little performance of self-sufficiency. Instead, I took it. Thank you, I said. That's kind. She lingered at the doorway, then stepped inside. I signed us up for a workshop. She blurted, at the community center on caring for aging parents without losing your mind. Despite myself, I smiled. Catchy title, I said. She rolled her eyes. The wording's awful, she said, but the social worker running it seems solid. I thought, I don't know, maybe hearing this stuff from someone who isn't you would help. And I figured it couldn't hurt for me to sit in a room full of people who also grew up thinking their parents were structural supports, not humans. We stood there, lasagna between us like a peace offering. You don't have to tell me if you go, I said, or what they say. She stared at the floor, then back up. I'll probably tell you anyway, she said. I'm not great at keeping my mouth shut. That's one of your more useful flaws, I said. She laughed, this time not bitterly. On her way out, she paused. For what it's worth, she said. I haven't said our house in months, not even in my head. That admission was worth more than the lasagna. Good, I said. It's easier to visit someone when you remember you're a guest. Emma grew. Kids do that indecent thing where they shoot up while you're still processing the last inch they gained. One day, she was a girl in a paper crown on an elementary school stage. The next, she was a middle schooler with a backpack heavier than my luggage and opinions about everything. She came over most Sundays now. Sometimes Nate dropped her off and went to run errands. Sometimes he stayed and helped with small repairs. A quiet nod to the reality that the house did not maintain itself by magic. Emma and I baked cookies and watched old movies and argued about whether phones at the table should be allowed. She eventually conceded that at Nana's. They were not. I taught her how to hem pants. She taught me how to send a picture in a group text without accidentally posting it to the entire internet. Once, while we were cleaning up after dinner. She leaned against the counter and said, Dad says you're set for life. What does that mean? I rinsed a plate slowly. It means, I said, that for the first time. My bills are covered without me having to hope someone else will rescue me. Didn't you rescue them? She asked. With money. The question was so sharp and simple it cut right through me. I did, I said, more than I should have. She thought about that, brow furrowing the way Nate's used to when he was little and trying to understand instructions for a board game. Is that why everyone was so mad about the will? She asked finally. I put the plate in the rack and turned to face her. People get mad when the rules they assumed were in place turn out to be different. I said, especially when those rules might have benefited them. Dad says he was wrong to assume. She said that Grandpa changed things because he didn't trust him to do the right thing, and that he's working on that. I swallowed hard. He's working on it. I agreed. And I'm working on not making promises with my money that my body has to pay for. She nodded solemnly, as if I'd just explained a math problem. I like that you're staying here, she said. It smells like Grandpa and cookies. That's the nicest real estate review I've ever heard, I said. She grinned. In her simple acceptance was a small, stubborn hope that the next generation might grow up seeing grandparents as people with their own lives, not just safety nets. On the anniversary of Bill's death, I didn't go to the cemetery. Instead, I spent the morning at the community center, folding brochures for a presentation on elder financial abuse. Charlie had connected Allison with the organizer, and somehow I'd ended up as the person who could say, yes, this happens. Yes, even in nice neighborhoods. Yes, even with people who never thought their own children would push them. I wasn't the main speaker. I didn't want to be. But when Allison finished her slides and asked if anyone had questions, one woman raised a trembling hand and said, "What if it's already started?" Her daughter, she explained, had her name on all the accounts. For convenience. They'd said, but lately, there were withdrawals she didn't recognize, family stuff. Her daughter called it when she pushed for explanations. Allison answered in measured, practical terms. You can change things, she said. You can take names off, add safeguards, get independent advice. It's not too late until it is. Then she glanced at me. Sometimes it helps, she said, to hear from someone who's been there. I hadn't planned on speaking, but my hand lifted anyway. I thought the worst thing that could happen to me was losing my husband. I said to the room, I was wrong. The worst thing was almost losing my home because I didn't want to believe my son could see it as a solution instead of a shelter. Dozens of eyes watched me, some sharp with curiosity, some wet with recognition. I didn't wake up one day strong and clear. I went on. It took a lot of fear and a lot of help. But the day I said no to signing away my house was the day my life stopped being something that would eventually belong to someone else and started being mine again. Afterward. A woman with a cane and a cardigan buttoned wrong took my hand. I thought it was just me. She whispered, "It never is." I said, that night, back at my kitchen table, I pulled out my own folder, the one with my updated will, my directives, my list of boundaries, and went through it piece by piece. No more all to my son. Provisions for Emma. A line item for a charity that might help some future woman hang on to her house. My name. Signed in a hand that looked older and shakier than it had when I signed the title to this place, but more deliberate. In the cabinet above the sink, my list of no mores had faded a bit around the edges from steam and time. I took it down, recopied it neatly on a fresh sheet, and added one more line at the bottom. No more pretending I don't know what my life is worth. I taped it back up. The house was still the same imperfect structure it had always been: creaky stairs, drafty windows, the cracked tile in the bathroom we'd never gotten around to replacing. My knees still complained on damp mornings. The coffee machine still sputtered before it settled into its rhythm. But the story had changed. I was no longer living inside a prologue to someone else's inheritance. I was, finally, living inside my own ending. By the time the maple tree on the corner flamed red again, a full year had almost passed. Seasons had moved through the house the way they always did. Snow piled against the back steps. Daffodils pushed through hard ground. Cicadas screamed in July. Grief changed shape but never really left. The first months it sat on my chest. Now it rode along on my shoulder, quieter, like a weight I'd learned to balance. One October morning, I sat once more in Allison's office, but this time in a sweater and sensible flats instead of a black dress and swollen eyes. "This visit," she said, opening a fresh file with my name printed on the tab, "isn't about Bill's plan for you, it's about your plan for yourself." The sentence landed with surprising force. For so long, my job had been to fit myself inside other people's plans, Bill's overtime, Nate's emergencies, Jess's expectations. I drew a slow breath and nodded. "All right," I said. "Where do we start?" "With the same question I ask every client," she said. "What do you want your last years to actually look like? Not what your son thinks they should look like. Not what your parents look like. Yours." I'd never been invited to answer that so plainly. "I want to stay in my house as long as I can safely manage it." I said, "I don't want to be forced out because someone else needs my equity more than I need my bed. And if I ever have to move to assisted living, I want it to be because it's right for me, not because it's convenient for anyone else." She wrote as I spoke, translating my plain words into bullet points. "Housing and care," she summarized. "Top priority. Everything else comes after that. Everything else." For decades, everything else had come first. She moved to the next page, right now. Most of your documents still read like Bill assumed Nate would inherit everything and do right by you. She said, "We know better now. Do you still want a version of all to my son?" "No," I said, surprised at how easily the word came. "I don't." "Good." She said simply, "Then we'll write something different." We went line by line through powers of attorney and healthcare directives, what would happen if I couldn't speak for myself. I chose Nate as my medical decision-maker for now, for all his flaws with money. He did show up in emergencies. Allison added language requiring doctors to be involved, checks to keep him from confusing convenience with mercy. Then we turned to the will. "Think in layers," she said. "Layer 1 is you. Layer 2 is the people you'd like to benefit if there's anything left. Layer 3 is causes you care about. Layer 1 was new territory. I want enough set aside that if I live longer than anyone expects, I can actually afford to." I said, "Not just scrape by until my teeth fall out and the furnace dies on the same day." She smiled faintly. Permission granted. She said, "We'll make that the default instead of the emergency." Layer 2 made my throat tight. "I don't want to erase Nate." I said, "He's still my son. And Emma, I don't want her punished for mistakes she didn't make. We can reflect that." She said, "Without pretending everyone has behaved the same. We built something that felt like the truth. Emma would have a modest college fund in her own name if there was money left when I died, with a neutral adult as trustee until she was old enough not to hand the account to the first charming boyfriend who came along. Nate would receive limited help through a trust that paid tuition if he ever went back to school, or therapy, or a portion of a down payment only if he could show he'd carried his own weight for a while. No blank checks, no lottery tickets, and if he hates the conditions I asked, then he's free not to use them." She said, "You're not obligated to finance the same patterns that almost cost you your home." The third layer came almost as an afterthought. "What happens to anything he or Emma doesn't take?" I asked. "It can revert to the estate," she said, "or go somewhere else you name." I thought of the brochure we'd handed out at the workshop on elder financial abuse, of the shaking hands that had gripped mine afterward. Could some of it go to an organization that helps older people in trouble, I asked? Legal aid, hotline, something like that. People who don't have a Charlie. "Absolutely," she said, already typing. "We'll name one specifically so there's no confusion." When the drafts were finished, she flipped the pages around so they faced me. "This is you," she said. "Not Bill, not Nate, not what people do. You." The legal language was dense, but the structure underneath it looked like a map drawn for the woman I was now, not the girl version of me who had promised away a future she didn't understand. I signed where she pointed. My signature looked shakier than it did on my marriage license, but for the first time, it felt fully mine. "Congratulations," Allison said. "You've just made sure that the next time someone talks about what's fair, your name is actually in the equation, on the bus ride home." I held the folder on my lap like something fragile and warm. For years, a quiet, ugly thought had lived in me that I was just a bridge between Bill's work and Nate's comfort, meant to stand until it was time for someone else to cross. The stack of papers said otherwise. I was not infrastructure. I was a person with an address and a future that did not end the moment I signed anything. With the legal framework finally matching my life, the house itself started to feel less like a contested asset and more like the place I woke up in. I made a list one evening at the kitchen table, the same way I used to make lists of Nate's school supplies. Fix the drip in the back bedroom before the ceiling stains again. Replace the lumpy mattress that makes my hips throb. Get the furnace serviced before January, not during it. 10 years ago, I would have looked at that list and thought of how each item chipped away at what I could someday give my son. Now, when the roofer came by with an estimate, I thought of what each repair gave me: warmth, sleep, the ability to stay here without misery. When he finished, I stood in the back bedroom during the next rainstorm and listened. No bucket, No damp patch blooming across the paint, just the steady drum of rain on shingles and the radiator's quiet ticking. I paid for that sound. I thought, for me. It felt almost scandalous. I took a small job at the library 3 afternoons a week, shelving books and helping people battle the copier. The extra income covered little luxuries, better groceries. A haircut every 6 months instead of every year, but the job also did something more important. It put me in a place where no one knew me as Nate's mom or Bill's widow. I was just Maggie, the woman who knew where they kept the biographies and how to clear a paper jam. One slow Tuesday, a teenager with blue hair came to the desk, arms full of books. "You're always here," she said. "Do you live at the library, basically?" I said, "I have a bed in the back between the shelves." She laughed, then looked me up and down. "My grandma just sits at home watching game shows." She said, "You're cooler than my grandma." I didn't feel particularly cool, standing there in my sensible shoes with my name tag a little crooked. But it struck me that someone, somewhere, might be looking at me and seeing something besides a burden or a checkbook. On Thursdays, I went to water aerobics at the community center. The first time I walked into the locker room with my swimsuit rolled in a towel, I almost turned around. My thighs were softer than they used to be. My arms bore the map of years in small sags and spots. Then I saw the other women bodies of every shape and size, laughing about grandkids and recipes and blood pressure medication, and the shame eased. In the water, my joints hurt less. The instructor shouted gentle encouragement over bad 80s music, and we all splashed along. Not pretty, but determined. Between sets, Denise, the woman I'd met on my first day, would paddle over to gossip about the town council or a new bakery. "Are your kids freaking out that you get your hair wet?" she asked once. "They don't know," I said. "And if they did, they'd survive." She grinned. "There she is," she said. The rebel. The word made me laugh, but a tiny piece of me liked it after class. Sometimes I stopped at that same bakery and bought myself a muffin or a coffee just because it sounded good. I paid for them out of the line in my budget labeled Maggie's Life. It wasn't much, just a few dollars here and there. But every time I handed over my card, it felt like a small vote in favor of my own continued existence. At home, the fridge door acquired new decorations. Mixed in among Emma's school photos and old snapshots of Bill were things for me: the schedule for my exercise class, a flyer for a book club, a quote torn from a magazine that said, "You are allowed to be a story that does not end in sacrifice." I taped my no more list inside the kitchen cabinet on fresh paper. The old one yellowed and wrinkled from steam. No more co-signing just this once. No more loans that only go one way. No more just put it on your card. Mom, no more pretending I don't understand the paperwork. No more apologizing for things I cannot safely give. At the bottom, in my newer, firmer handwriting, I added no more planning my life around someone else's inheritance. I read it every morning while the coffee percolated. Some days it felt like armor. Some days it felt like a dare. Nate came by more often now, though never without just enough advance notice that I could choose whether to be home. Sometimes he brought Emma. Sometimes he came alone, a folder in his hand or a new story about therapy. My counselor says I have to stop talking about the house like it's a savings account, he admitted once, sitting at the table with a mug of my coffee. It's a place with a person in it. She made me draw it on a whiteboard and then write your name across the roof. "How'd that feel?" I asked. "Weird," he said. True, but weird. There were still flashes of the old patterns, little sighs when I mentioned replacing the furnace, a too long pause when I talked about fixing the porch steps. "That's expensive," he'd say automatically. "Yes," I'd answer. So his freezing to death. He would huff out a reluctant laugh and let it go, one afternoon. He spread new papers across the table, but they weren't mine. They were his, a budget worksheet, a payment plan, a schedule of therapy appointments. "I'm not very good at this," he said. "Numbers. You're better than you think," I said. "You just don't like what they say yet." He traced a line of debt balances with his finger. I keep wanting to call these temporary, he said, but they've been around longer than Emma. That's not temporary. I said, that's a relationship. He grimaced. My therapist says I need to break up with my credit cards. He said, listen to her. I said, she sounds smart. He smiled faintly. She also says I need to stop using you as the emergency exit in every scenario. He added, that I can love you without expecting you to fix things I broke. I swallowed hard. It was one thing for Allison to say those words from a legal distance. Hearing them from my son was something else entirely. Do you believe her? I asked. I'm trying to. He said, I know I've been unfair. I just didn't know the word for it before. Entitled, I said, that's the word. He winced, then nodded. Yeah, he said, that one. There were still days when resentment flickered across his face, quick as summer lightning, when he talked about friends whose parents already put their houses in their names. But now he seemed to recognize the feeling when it surfaced, to sit with it instead of letting it drive. I'm working on not letting that voice run things, he said once, the one that says, I'm owed something. Good, I said. That voice nearly took my house. He didn't argue. Jess's shifts came slower, but they came. She and I never magically turned into best friends. We still rubbed each other the wrong way, sometimes her impatience. My tendency to go quiet, but the edges softened. She stopped making jokes about wheelchair-accessible condos when we passed new developments. I stopped assuming every suggestion she made was secretly about her convenience. Once, she came over with a notebook full of scribbles. I went to that workshop, she said, setting it on the table. The Caring for Aging Parents one. They talked about boundaries, yours and ours, about not treating older relatives like live-in staff or ATMs. And I asked, she blew out a breath. Apparently, I've been using words like help and family to justify things that are really about me not wanting to be uncomfortable. She said, like asking you to watch Emma so I can get a break every time I'm overwhelmed, instead of figuring out my own childcare. That's honest. I said, unflattering. She corrected, but honest. We both smiled, rueful. At the end of that visit, she stood in the doorway with her car keys twisting in her hands. I'm still mad sometimes, she admitted, about the will, about how it all blew up. But I'm also relieved that there's someone telling us no before we make you our solution again. Consider me your early warning system. I said, the siren that goes off before you crash into me. She laughed, then sobered. Thank you, she said, for not letting us. It wasn't a grand apology. It didn't erase the hurt of hearing, it's our house now at my own table, but it was a crack in the wall between us, big enough to let some light through. On quiet evenings, when the dishes were washed and the television was off, I sometimes sat alone in the living room with Bill's letter in my lap. The paper had grown soft at the folds. I knew every line by heart now, but I still read it. If Nate ever treats our home like a lottery ticket and you like a nuisance in the way, I want it legally clear the house belongs to you. The first time I'd read that sentence, it had felt like an accusation as much as a shield. Now it felt like a hand on my back. I did it. I would whisper to the empty chair across from me, I stayed. The new beginning of my life did not look glamorous. There were no late-in-life romances sweeping me off to new cities. No surprise inheritances from long-lost relatives. There was my same small house, my same knees that ached when it rained, my same morning coffee routine. The difference was that I no longer looked at my front door and saw a countdown clock. I looked at it and saw something radical, a threshold that belonged, unequivocally, to me. I used to think love meant handing my life over in little pieces. Use my credit if you need to. One day, this house will be yours anyway. I said those words for years, without understanding what they really were, invitations. Invitations for my son, my daughter-in-law, the world, to treat my work and my roof like something already detached from me. Losing Bill broke my heart. Hearing my own child talk about our house at his father's funeral broke something else the story I'd been telling myself about what family automatically means. When Charlie called that day, I thought the worst thing I could hear was that Bill had kept secrets from me. I was wrong. The worst thing was realizing I had kept a bigger secret from myself that I was allowed to have a say. Here is what I know now. Your name is not a favor other people get to borrow. It is legal power. It is your life. A will, a deed, a signature. None of those are formalities. They are levers. Put in the right hands. They protect you. Put in the wrong hands. They move your walls without you even noticing they've shifted. I used to believe everything we built would naturally roll downhill to Nate, and that being a good mother meant smoothing that path. Now I understand something much simpler and much harder. The first person my life owes anything to is me. If you're watching this and hearing pieces of your own story, the casual when we sell your place, the just sign here. It's easier. The come live with us. We'll figure the paperwork out later. Please listen to the part of you that flinched. That's not ingratitude. That's self-preservation. Ask questions until you understand the answers. Put your wishes on paper with someone whose paycheck doesn't depend on your signature. Stop calling it helping the kids if what you really mean is, I'm afraid they'll leave if I say no. I didn't get back the years I spent training my son to see my house as his someday prize. But I did keep the roof over my head, and in the end, that was Bill's last gift and my first real yes to myself. If any part of my story felt familiar, please don't shrug it off. Check your papers. Read before you sign. Ask a lawyer, not your most persuasive relative. And if someone keeps saying, it's just a formality, let that be your red flag. Share this with anyone whose roof is at risk.